Alright, we're going to be solving quadratic equations. Let's see that. Using square roots. And this is J6. Square roots. Alright, so the first problem I see, it's got z squared equals 36. So your goal is to get your variable by itself, which it is already here. So once it's by itself, so you'd have a coefficient of 1 technically, and there's nothing else before it or after it. You simply take the square root of both sides. So that leaves you the z equals either a positive 6 or a negative 6. Here's another example where they give a fairly simple problem, except your solution is not a real number. It's going to be an imaginary number. So again, we have a variable here, p squared, which is by itself. So we are ready to take the square root of both sides. So over here we have a square root of negative 64. So when you have these types of problems, we have to separate these as such. So square root of negative 1 times square root of 64 gives you square root of negative 64. Square root of negative 1 is that imaginary number I. And then over here we have square root of 64, which is 8. So 8 I times 8 is usually written as 8I. And remember, we're taking the square root of a number, so it could be positive or it could be negative. So positive 8I or negative 8I is the square root of negative 64. You might hear kids or dogs in the background, so don't be alarmed. Another example I see here is if you have a variable that's already by itself and just equal to 0, your solution is just 0. So in this case we have one real solution. Over here these are two imaginary solutions, and here we have two real solutions because these are real numbers. Forgot my towels, so I'll use my sweatshirt. Alright, another problem I see is where the variable is not quite by itself, because out here we have a negative 1. So we need that to be a positive 1. So to get it positive, you just divide both sides by negative 1. So now we have w squared equals negative 1. And this is similar to that last problem, where we have to pull out an I when we take the square root of the negative 1. So your solution is, put the 1 first, 1 times I, and make that look more like a 1. It's positive or negative. And if you remember, I times I is negative 1. I'm gonna give you another example. Haven't seen, but let's say 4x squared plus 6 equals 22. So here we need to isolate your x squared. So we're gonna get rid of the positive 6 by subtracting from both sides. So we have 4 times x squared equals 16 divided by 4, and x squared equals 4. So the variable's isolated, so now you just take the square root. X equals plus or minus 2. Going back to this, one other thing I was thinking of. So if we have, let's say, in this example, you have 1i. So what this is saying is that if you take 1i times 1i, you're going to get 1i squared. And going back to this, if you can see it, I times I is negative 1, so basically I squared equals negative 1. So over here you would take I squared out and replace it with negative 1. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1, which brings us back to that. So here we have 2 imaginary solutions, or non-real, and over here we have 2 real solutions. Alright, so hopefully this helps, and we'll see you next time.